dari sini.
Coba sama tidak.
Tapi dia nggak ada pas-pasnya, Indonesia dari itu pas-pasnya.
Tapi dari lokal. Ayo deh.
Satu, dua, tiga. Benar sih. Kayak lu ketutupan pas-pasnya.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Ah yeah. It's yes. They feel something. It's like di depan dong, ya. Nah, hasilnya di depan loh ini. Ya, depan. Cái tới thứ sáu tuổi.
Tes. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, dan kita semua. Distinguished guests, esteemed faculty members, and valued participants, both of those present here in the conference hall of G Building, and those joining us virtually through Zoom. My peace and blessing be upon all of us. I am deeply honored to extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you of today's prestigious gathering. Your presence, whether physical and virtual, has significantly differed. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. My name is Putri Paniraban, and it's my honor to serve you as Master of Ceremonials for today's General Lecturer at the Department of Biology, Faculty Science and Mathematics, Diponegoro University, with the topic LIDAR in Ecological Research and Conservation Monitoring. For our honored participants, we kindly request that you maintain your microphone on the to-go transition unless invited to speak during the Q&A segment. Should you encounter any technical difficulties, our IT support team is ready to assist you through the Zoom chat feature. We are gathered today, both physical and virtually, for the promise to be an enlightening academic session, especially in the field of cutting-edge of application of LIDAR technology and ecology research and conservation efforts. Please allow me to outline today's meeting. We shall commence with opening remarks, proceed to our main lecture session, continue with an interactive Q&A segment, accommodating in-person and online participants, and also conclude with a presentation ceremony and commemorative photographs. At this time, I would like to respectfully invite Dr. Anto Budiarjo, Head of the Department of Biology at Diponegoro University, to deliver the opening remarks. Dr. Anto, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Fahira. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. And today it's our pleasure to invite Dr. Calvert from Meta, Australia, to share his insight on his research in LIDAR technology for the biomonitoring of the ecosystem. And actually, Dr. Calvert come here for holiday. kind of working and also holiday. So and then I asked him to give this kind of sharing his expertise. So I hope that the student and also the lecturer can have something useful to increase the knowledge of the technology that is used for monitoring the ecosystem based on the Calvert's experience. And I would like to thank again, and also the participant, the lecturer we have here, Dr. Baskoro, one of our lecturers in biosystematics. So we can discuss later on our, maybe we can have kind of collaboration, things like that. So after this general lecture, we can discuss later. And thank you very much, Rui, for taking care everything, and also Mas Calvert helping to take care of this event. Thank you very much also for students who already come here, and we will enjoy the presentation from Dr. Generale. Thank you very much. Thank you back to Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Anto, for those enlightening words. Now, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce our moderator for today's session. Today's discussion will be led by Dr. Nurila Hadian. He is a distinguished expert in the field of soil ecology and entomology. Dr. Hadian brings in intensive expertise in soil microarthropod and colonial research, making him uniquely qualified to guide our conversation today. And Dr. Hadian completed his doctoral study at the University of the Philippines, Los Banos, where his groundbreaking research focused on collaborative communities and nutrient mineralization. Prior to this, he earned his master's degree from the Bandung Institute of Technology, where he conducted innovative research on decomposition studies and microarthropod abundance in Japan. His academic journey began at the same institution, where he completed his bachelor degree with research on the pest management, specifically studying the sustainability of dialectic moth caterpillars to various treatments. As an active member of Indonesian Entomological Society and respect force in his field, Dr. Hadian insights will undoubtedly enrich our discussion today. And ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Hadian or Sir Ruby. Okay, may I now welcome on for Dr. Hadian and our estimated speaker. Please welcome Dr. Jan Calvert to cover our session.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Putri, our MC today, for the introduction. And thank you to everyone here, for being a part of today's general lecture. So it's great honor to be here today as a moderator for this event, especially on a topic that is so interesting, the current research and technology applied on LiDAR, in ecological research and conservation monitoring. So as you may know, LiDAR technology, do you know LiDAR already? Yeah, it's time to to know about the LiDAR, So LiDAR is a revolutionizing ecological research by providing comprehensive, high-resolution data on both vegetation and topography. I think many modern car, including Tesla, using LiDAR also. Okay, yeah. Because with using high resolution, it does this enhance understanding, support effective conservation strategies, and also habitat management and biodiversity protection. So making a LiDAR a vital tool in modern ecological and environmental science. So today we are fortunate to have a competent expert in this field with us, Dr. Calvert from Australia. Okay, he is a molecular microbial ecologist, yeah, with extensive expertise in spatial forest ecology and conservation biology. So Dr. J completed his PhD at the University of Queensland, Australia. So where his research focused on the relationship between fungal symbiont and threatened rainforest plants. With a solid foundation in conservation ecology from the University of Southern Queensland, Dr. J. Calvert has also studied at institutions across the globe, including Northern Arizona University, bringing an international perspective to his research. Currently, Dr. Calvert serves as a postdoctoral research ecologist with Arbormeta. So it is startup company, Arbormeta, yeah, where he leads innovative projects on spatial forest ecology, employing advanced technologies such as LiDAR scanning to map forest biomass and study ecological phenomena, allowing him to collaborate like termite hollowing. His fieldwork has taken him across Australia, Brazil, and Indonesia, allowing him to collaborate closely with indigenous communities, conservation organizations, and research institutes worldwide. Through his career, Dr. Calvert has made impactful contributions to scientific literature with publication in high-impact journals and presentations at many conferences. His work spans a diverse range of ecological studies, from plant biosecurity and marsupial surveys to ecosystem mapping and biodiversity restoration. So today, we have the privilege of hearing Dr. Calvert share his insight and experiences from his groundbreaking work in conservation and forest ecology. So without further ado, I would like to invite our distinguished speaker, Dr. Chad Calvert. Okay, Dr. Chad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ruby. I think I'll come and stand up, if that's okay. I'll come down. And thank you to Dr. Anton for organizing the talk today. Must have stepped down. And welcome to all the students and faculty, and thanks for coming to this. So I'll talk about some of the research I've been involved in using LiDAR for ecological monitoring and also for measurement of carbon in carbon markets. And I'd be very happy to answer any questions at the end. So if you're curious or if something's not clear, then just ask and we can have a discussion. So just so you know a little bit about me, this is where I'm from. This is the national park close to the town I come from. It's very small, 20,000 people in eastern Australia. And the big city is Brisbane, which is where I live with Lydia. So we're usually based in Brisbane, and now we're lucky enough to be visiting here in Java. And I have been to Indonesia a couple of times before, and had a really good time doing some bike trips in Sumbawa and in Sulawesi Selatan. So I've seen a little bit more in Nusa Tenggara, not so much this side of Indonesia, but some other. So just a little bit about my research background. For my honours, which is like a one-year master's, and my PhD, I studied fungi plant interactions in native orchidaceae in Australia and in rainforest plants. So these are some of the fungal isolates that we found. On the right, up the top of the orchids that we were working with, the vulnerable orchids that are native to southeastern Australia. And during my undergraduate, I actually spent a little bit of time in Sumbawa, and we were working on madu hutan. And it was more like a sociological project. I was helping some colleagues who were doing a PhD, and we're looking at the supply chains of madu hutan. So the people who collect the honey, who they sell it to, and how it eventually gets to somewhere like Java where you can buy it. So that was super interesting. We stayed in this village in Sumbawa and met a lot of really interesting people and had a great time. On the right, you can see in a mangrove forest, we went and were collecting the mud all the time. So now I work more with what we call spatial forest ecology. Some of you might be familiar with LiDAR, but I'll go through a little bit of the research that we do, and hopefully when you go away, you'll have a bit more of an understanding of what the technology is and how it can be used in ecology. But just to give you a little bit of a background, most of you probably have seen these sorts of graphs before. These are the average temperatures. The 0 degrees is just the average between 1961 and 1990. And these are the temperatures climbing up, the global average temperatures. So this is the kind of graph that's on everybody's mind, working in the carbon space, because the carbon emissions are still accumulating, and we've had the hottest 10 years on record in the last 10 years, and the average temperatures are going to be the hottest for hundreds of thousands of years. I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with that, but this is the context we work in. And then, aside from the climate crisis, we have this biodiversity crisis. So it's just a scary headline from the Guardian newspaper. Humanity is on the verge of shattering Earth's natural limits, say experts in biodiversity warning. So that photo is taken in Madagascar, in an area that used to be farmland. So we have these two crises, and why measure trees and forest structure? Well, they're related crises. The climate crisis is directly related to forests because carbon is captured and stored in plant structures. And forests actually contain most of the Earth's carbon, stored carbon. So when it's sequestered, it's usually stored in forests, about 80%. So that's why they're very important structures. And in terms of biodiversity, forest structures are an indicator of ecosystem condition. So the more complex the forest is in general, the more species it's able to support. So for these two reasons, that's why the organization I work for is very interested in quantifying forest structure in terms of carbon and in terms of the ecology that it supports. So in the past, there have been, and it's still used today, there's been some approaches to measure carbon in forests. So this is a technique called allometric scaling models. Basically, you measure the diameter of a tree, and then you cut it down, and then weigh how much the tree is. And if you do that with a lot of different trees, you basically get a graph like the one up on the right, and it shows a relationship between the DBH, the diameter of breast height of a tree, and its carbon content. It's not an exact relationship, but it enables people to guess more or less how much carbon is going to be in a tree if you measure its diameter. So the problem is that when you use these models, you have to generate a new model for every ecosystem that you work in. So say you're working in a tropical rainforest in Java, or working in a dry savanna in Brazil, you would need a different allometric model for each place, because the relationship between the tree's DBH and the tree's biomass is different depending on the ecosystem. And as you can imagine, they're difficult and expensive to generate. So all of these points on the graph are individual trees, and all of those trees have to be cut down, including the really big ones, and weighed. So to generate these models is a time-consuming and very expensive exercise. On the other end of the spectrum, there's some satellite models that you can use to estimate biomass, and there's been quite a few different models made globally. Those can be helpful, but the problem is that a lot of the prominent models that are used in different publications and in research, they don't agree with each other. So that's an issue because some of them have to be wrong, but there's not very valid ways of determining which ones are correct. So there's a high level of disagreement between different models. So what is LiDAR? Like Dr. Rulli was saying, it's used in lots of different things. One of the prominent uses that's been used for today is in autonomous vehicles. So these cars that can drive themselves will have a little LiDAR on top of them. Basically, it stands for light detection and ranging. It's a laser, it's kind of like a laser camera. You can think about it like that. It shoots out laser beams from the screen, and then it measures the time taken for the light to come back to the machine. And then that time is converted to a distance, and each of those laser beams that went out gives you a little point in space, which is like the picture in the background. So all of those palm trees and lianas and vines, they were all captured by a laser scanner, and then you have basically a 3D model of the forest. It requires a lot of computing power to process the LiDAR scans, and so even though the technology's been around for 20 years, only in the last sort of 10 years has it been useful, because now it's much cheaper to get a powerful computer to process this kind of data. And it's very popular in construction, archaeology, in the military, and in mining. So this is just to give an idea of how useful it can be in archaeology. So this is in Bolivia, in the Amazon. With LiDAR, you can scan the forest from the air, from an aeroplane, and then you can digitally strip away, take away all of the vegetation, and it allows you to see all of the structures underneath. So archaeologists are super enthusiastic about using this technology because it allows you to see these kind of structures underneath the jungle, and you don't have to go looking for it. It's a very efficient way of finding new archaeological sites, and they found new civilizations that they didn't know about, particularly in the Amazon. So there's three broad categories of use of LiDAR. The machine is more or less the same, but the platforms are different. So the first one is terrestrial laser scanning. That's when you have a tripod, like the tripod that the camera is on the back. And you sit the laser scanner on the tripod, and then you put it wherever you want to measure, like in the forest, or you put it in a city, whatever you're using, in a mine. And then it spins around, and it will capture a 3D model of wherever it is on the ground. So that's what that tree is from, a very high resolution model of a tree from a terrestrial LiDAR. Then there's aerial laser scanning. So it's the same thing, but you put it on an aeroplane and then fly over wherever you want to measure. So you get a bigger distance, a bigger area of measured structures, in this case trees, but you can see the resolution under the trees is less because the LiDAR is coming from the sky. So you don't get as much in the understory or the trunks of the tree. And then finally, from space, the resolution is even lower. So you get much bigger areas that basically scan the whole globe with LiDAR, but they're long lines that are 600 meters apart. And you can kind of measure the height of forests, and you can kind of get the topography of the landscape, but you don't get much detail. So usually people who are working with biomass and trying to measure with LiDAR, you end up having to use a combination of these three things. So maybe I'll just show a quick video that's made by Calvert, which is the organization I work for, just to kind of explain the process a bit and to give you a bit of an idea of what it looks like. So this is a forest in Papua New Guinea where we have a contract and we're working. But this is in Australia. So this kind of gives a bit of an overview of how the teams go out and collect the data that we work with. This is kind of where a lot of the carbon projects are. So people are receiving money to grow more trees in the landscape. But a lot of these projects in Australia are out in very dry areas. And the reason is because the government is unwilling to open up land that's agriculturally productive. So most of the carbon projects happen in the middle of the country where it's dry. But there's the LiDAR scanner. So this is some of my colleagues. So they'll take it out, they'll decide where they want to scan, so where they want to measure the trees, and then make a grid pattern. So each one of those points is one scan from the terrestrial LiDAR scanner. And all of those scan positions will be merged together into one point cloud. So it's pretty hard work, it's very hot out there. The scan is heavy, it's about 20 kilograms with all the batteries. And it takes about 45 seconds to spin around. So in the end, it's a little bit hard to see actually on this screen, but in the end you have a 3D model of each tree, and those models can be used to measure the volume of the tree, the height, how the branches, the architecture of the branches, basically anything you want to measure about the tree, you've kind of got a digital twin. And then there's the processing part. So all of the data sets are quite big. It's about 200 gigabytes per scan. So when you multiply that by 36 positions, it's quite a lot of data. But you basically end up with these models of the tree that you can then use to generate a big complicated data set to answer the kinds of questions that you want. So it's being used a lot in forest ecology, but a lot of plantations, for example, like commercial plantations, are interested in it because it helps them to quantify how much wood's growing. And then, like I was saying, even away from the tree and forest space, mining companies like it because you can measure how much stuff is coming out of the ground very precisely. Anything that has a spatial component is now, will have a LiDAR team if there's money involved, basically. So yeah, you can stop the video if you want. Okay, so I'll just give a few examples of the kinds of research that we've been doing. And we've been looking at 4 broad knowledge gaps. So we're interested in the area introduced by hollow trees. There's a lot of hollow trees in particular ecosystems like savannas. And the LiDAR basically assumes that the tree is solid when you measure it. But we know that there are hollow trees, and we wanted to know how much error that introduces. How can we extend these accurate measurements across the landscape? So like I was showing in the previous slide, the terrestrial laser scanning is very accurate, but you can't do it across a large area. So how can you extend that across the landscape? How are rainforest light environments distributed at different heights? So this is a more ecological question, and we've been working with the botanists to look at that. And finally, dead wood. We've been looking at how to measure that important carbon for not just living trees, but dead trees, because a lot of carbon is stored in dead trees. So this is a recent study that we did with Abby Yatsko, who was a PhD student at the University of Miami. So up to 35% of the above ground biomass in savannas is damaged. So these are the kinds of ecosystems that we're interested in to look at the problem of hollowing and how it affects biomass measurement with LiDAR. And the reason they're damaged is you can see the termite mound. Termites are a really dominant feature of savanna ecosystems all around the world. And fungi are also a dominant feature of pretty much any ecosystem that has wood in. So that's why you end up with trees like this, like the one on the right, where I think this one, it was close to 40% of the structure was missing. So all of that wood, when you measure with LiDAR, you basically get an estimate that's far higher. But this was our hypothesis anyway. Are the estimates too high? So this is, again, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is basically the assumptions we work on. We model the trees using cylinders, and we assume that all of those cylinders are solid. And this could be a problem if there's error associated with it. For these global carbon models, which are starting to use terrestrial LiDAR to calibrate the satellite models. And particularly in Australia, the forest carbon offsets markets. So Australia has a commitment to get to net zero by 2050 and be a certain distance along the way by 2030, like Indonesia would have. Any country that went to Paris has those agreements. And Australia is relying very heavily on offset markets. So they're assuming that the trees that we're growing out in the middle of Australia will offset the emissions that big companies and the government indicate. So that's why it could be a problem, because the offsets, if they're not accurately representing how much carbon is in the forest, are not really offsetting anything. So this is the sort of practical application of why we're interested. So our question was, is termite and fungal hollowing of trees associated with overestimates of tree biomass using PLS? So we took wood samples from these 63 trees. So we would have a wood density value, and we scanned them all, and we multiplied the volume of the trees by the wood density. So we had estimates of how much the tree should weigh. And then we cut all the trees down, and using this machine and a scale, just close to the top, you can see a little box. That's a scale to measure the weight. We measured all of the trees, and we got actual observed weights in the field. And then we also tested the estimates of terrestrial laser scanning against the allometric models that I was mentioning earlier, where they measure around the diameter of the tree. And this was up in the north of Australia, very close to Papua New Guinea. So these are some of the results of how the allometric models performed against terrestrial laser scanning. So you can see that although the one on the top right, on average, it measures when everything's kind of smoothed out, it measures fairly accurately. The error is actually quite big on a per tree level. So each of those points is a tree. Along the x-axis are the actual weights that we got, and then on the y-axis are the model weights from allometric models and terrestrial laser scanning. So basically, we found that terrestrial laser scanning was a lot more accurate than the allometric scaling models, which wasn't surprising. And then over the total of the 63 trees that we measured, we found that it was also the most accurate way to measure them. So it's the second one from the left in the colourful stuff there. We also measured where all of the hollowing was happening in the trees for one of the ecological questions of how did the PhD students study. And we found that, unsurprisingly, most of the hollowing, the big hollowing values were in the lower parts of the tree down to the stem. And that's probably because the termites more easily get in at the bottom and the fungi more easily get in at the bottom. So we concluded that the biomass of large internally damaged trees tended to be overestimated by TLS. And the total missing biomass in 63 trees, some of these trees were pretty big, but most of them were small. The total missing biomass was 2.6% of the expected biomass, so about half a ton. And this is the modeling that we did. So we measured the hollowing in the trees, and then we were able to superimpose a linear model of the hollowing on a wireframe model of the tree from terrestrial laser scanning. So that's what that is. And this, if you're interested in knowing more about the methods and the interpretation of the results, that's the publication there if you want to look that up. So the conclusion was that it is more accurate than allometric scaling models for estimating tree biomass. And one thing we concluded is that it's becoming more and more popular. So if people are going to be trying to quantify biomass in savanna ecosystems, they need to check how much hollowing is present in the ecosystem first to be able to compensate for the error that's introduced from hollowing. And what you can use is one of these devices. It's basically like a big needle, and it pushes into the tree. It's called a resi drill. It pushes into the tree and then measures the resistance. And if there's a hollow in the middle of the tree, it pops through, and it gives you a reading that shows that there's a hollow. So what you could do is do some sampling, measure say 100 trees, and then you would know how much hollowing is likely to be in the system. You could compensate for that when you do the data analysis. So this is one more project we've been involved in. This is also a carbon-based offset program that the Australian government runs. This one's a little bit different. Basically, you would have heard that Australia is very prone to big fires every dry season. And some people who are involved in the program and have big areas, like there's a lot of big areas owned by Aboriginal people, owned by people who have farms up in the north of Australia. They basically burn early in the dry season, very small fires, and cooler fires. They call them cooler fires, and it combusts less biomass. And that prevents a really big fire in the late dry season. So based on the amount of CO2 and other emissions factors that were not released because of the burning early in the dry season, these landowners receive money from the Australian government, and it generates carbon credits. And those credits are then sold to companies who are emitting CO2, and those companies are able to keep emitting CO2. It's a funny setup. It should work, but if it isn't set up properly, then it's a potentially problematic situation. So what we wanted to know was, given that there's recent research that shows that if you burn really frequently, it reduces the amount of trees in the landscape and the size of the trees and the amount of germination. How much woody biomass is actually in the landscape, and can we measure that? So how can we measure is if tree biomass is increasing or decreasing across the landscape? So in this project, we've been using a combination of terrestrial laser scanning, aerial laser scanning from an aeroplane, and satellite imagery, plus machine learning, so neural network modeling to extend those predictions across the landscape. So basically, this is a canopy height model from an aeroplane. So the aeroplane flew twice, once across the area, and another time across the area, and so that generated a canopy height model. The blocks are also terrestrial laser scan plots that allowed us to calibrate how much woody biomass, measured by the stem in the terrestrial laser scan plots, is under the canopy height model produced by the aerial laser scan. Let me know if it's getting too technical, and if it doesn't make sense, please ask questions at the end. Basically, we use that as training data for a neural network model that takes in those inputs from the LiDAR and uses satellite imagery to generate predictions of biomass across this area. So in this case, it's 7,000 hectares. And the idea would be, if somebody's introducing a burning program in this area, then you would do this, say, in 2024, 2025, 2026, and you'd be able to measure how much biomass is being stored across the landscape, and you would know what the effect of the different burning programs. So this approach is currently being considered by a big Aboriginal corporation in the north of Australia who control most of the burning programs, and it's likely that it's going to be implemented. So proposals to sequester carbon need to be measured to understand their effect on how biomass is stored and on the ecology. And this kind of technology can help provide the kind of clarity that we need. So this is a little bit different, maybe a bit more interesting for people who are studying ecology and maybe forest ecology. I don't know if there's any people interested in that. But this is something that we did with Dr. Robert Kuyman, who's a botanist from Australia. And he's very interested in the way light is distributed in forests. So particularly in a tropical rainforest, light is one of the most limited resources. And for a tree to get up from the bottom of the forest up into the canopy is a very lucky tree that makes it through that kind of difficult circumstance. So we were interested to see whether we could use LiDAR to measure how light is distributed in a tropical rainforest. So this is a scan plot. So like in the video you saw, each one of those white points is where the terrestrial laser scanner went on the tripod. And once we did all the scans, they're all stitched together, and then we modeled all of the trees in the area. And it's a bit hard to see again, but those little red dots are the trees. And this is kind of what it ends up looking like once it's modeled. So this is a new form of modeling that we're working on to get a more accurate volume for each tree. And this is what that area of forest looks like when you model how much sunlight is hitting each area. So I'll just show you how we did that. So we basically took the model of the forest, and then we modeled like a virtual sun to go 12 hours over the top. And as it goes over, it's shooting out rays. And for each part of the model that receives the sun ray, it gets a time factor. So basically, for any area inside the model, we can say this got 2 hours, or this got 6 hours of sun, or 8 hours of sun. So it's basically just a way to quantify how much sun is hitting each part of the forest. And then what we did was we divided the forest out into strata, because a lot of structural forest ecology is based on the level at which things happen in the forest. So we divided into 4 even areas. And then we were able to quantify how many hours of sunlight per day any given area in the forest receives. So for the green part, which is the level 1, you can see it's almost nothing. The average is something like maybe 20 minutes per day or less. For level 2, it was something maybe around 1, a little less than 1 hour per day. For level 3, the purple, it was getting something like 3.5 hours per day. And for 4, it's getting up more towards like 8 hours a day. So this seems obvious, but the botanist we're working with was very excited, because what they usually have to do to measure sunlight in a forest is really laborious. They have to go around with these little devices down on the forest floor, and those devices measure how much sun hits them. But they don't get any information about how much sun is hitting the layers up through the forest. So that's one example of how we've been using it in ecological monitoring. Here's another example. So we were basically looking at how forest structure is reflected in different conservation interventions. So on the left, we have a native forest that's never been logged. Next to that, there's a native forest where a lot of the big trees have been taken out, starting in the 1960s, or ending in the 1960s, sorry. Restoration planting, so that was basically empty land, like a farmland where they planted trees. Cabinet timber planting, so that's, you can see it's more laid out, so they were planting native Australian forest species that were for selling, basically, for selling the timber. And a weed control cleared native forest, so that's where they didn't plant anything, and they just looked to see which of the native plants would come back if they controlled the weed. And what we did was we ran some analyses to basically show that you can detect the structural complexity of these forests using LiDAR, and there are different ways that you can quantify that. So particularly in Australia, we're now looking at having biodiversity markets, so not just carbon markets, but markets where landowners who intervene, like for example plant trees, or it's usually planting trees, but they might do other things as well, like rehabilitate streams to increase the biodiversity of an area. They'll receive money in the same way that people who are involved in carbon markets will receive money. So with this kind of thing, it could be a standardized, detailed way to look at the progress of an area for somebody who's got a biodiversity project. And just lastly, some of you who are forest ecologists might be thinking, well, it's great if you can scan the forest, but what about all of the species? You can't tell the species by just scanning. So this is the way we get around that. So on the left is a stem map. That's all of the trees plotted according to their DPH, their diameter. That's how big the dot is. And starting at the biggest one, we generate a map based on a mathematical algorithm that is the most efficient way of getting from one tree through all of the trees and back to that first one. And we basically use this to navigate in the forest. And we either have a botanist who identifies the trees, and we're able to identify the tree and associate that with its digital model. Or sometimes we work in areas that are study sites and the trees actually have tags, and that tree will have some data associated with it, including the species. So in that way, we can associate all of the species information and diversity information with the laser scanning. So these long-standing ecological questions, like the one about light, have been pretty much unanswerable due to a lack of data. And so what we're finding exciting at the moment, working with people like Rob, the botanist, is that we can start answering these ecological questions with a fair degree of certainty. And so just one last example of what we've been working on. So these are some colleagues who are measuring dead wood on the ground, and they're opening it up and searching for termites. And the reason that they're so interested in dead wood is that 8% of global carbon stocks are actually in dead wood. And this is pretty important because depending on how wood decomposes, it will either remain in the carbon pool of the forest, or more likely it'll be returned as CO2 into the atmosphere. So it's an important driver of carbon cycling. No studies have looked directly at the interaction of the main decay agents, so fire, leaching, termites and microbes, particularly fungi. And so if a piece of wood is leached, like if water falls on it or sunlight breaks it down and it drops into the soil, that CO2, that carbon stays in the forest floor, stays in the carbon pool. But if it gets eaten by termites, then it will be released as methane. And methane is actually a worse greenhouse gas than CO2. So depending on how they break down, they can have a different effect on the climate, basically. So Baptiste, he's a researcher we've been working with, is trying to quantify how much carbon is in dead wood in different areas of Australia, in different ecosystems, to be used in carbon modelling for climate scenarios. So at the moment, the kinds of models where they predict how much CO2 will be emitted and how much can be absorbed by forests, those models don't have a very reliable component that looks at dead wood. So he's trying to generate a reliable module for global carbon models based on dead wood. So what we did for him was, instead of using a tape measure, which is what he usually does in his research, we scanned the forest and then we digitally took all the trees away, all the trees that were standing up. So we took them all away and then modeled all of the fallen timber. And you can see there's quite a lot. So it kind of makes sense that, to me, it actually looks like it could be more than 8%, but we were able to give a data set to him that had the volume of each piece of wood, the length, the width, and a few different other characteristics of the pieces of wood that he's able to use to take into his model and look at and compare between different sites. And that's kind of what it, so that's in meters, 5.5. That's what it looks like if you're looking from the forest floor across. So you can see it is quite a lot accumulated. So he's still working on that project in the postdoc that he's doing. That's kind of still happening. So we'll have to wait to see what kind of results he gets from that. So just to summarize that bit, the global carbon models need accurate inputs to predict future climates under different CO2 concentration scenarios. And we believe that terrestrial LiDAR is one way to standardize the measurement of the fallen wood pool. And so just to give a little bit of context, I mentioned about the Australian carbon industry. The Australian carbon industry has come under a lot of scrutiny and criticism recently because the way it's been set up has not been very well thought out, and there's a lot of emphasis on offsets, which is basically a way to emit more CO2 as a company or as an organization and not basically just pay for that. You don't have to reduce the amount of CO2 you're emitting. And the problem is that a lot of the offset projects that have been initiated in Australia are in areas where there's a lot of drought. So the trees will grow, that's great. The people who have, like farmers, for example, will receive money for those carbon credits. But then a drought comes along every 6 or 7 years in Australia and kills all the trees. The trees fall over and then the termites come and eat them, and then it all goes up as carbon dioxide or methane again. And so that, for that reason and for other administrative reasons, there's been a lot of criticism of the carbon industry in Australia, and they're looking around for ways to try to make it more transparent and more reliable, the way they measure trees on the ground. So that's the kind of context that this technology is being developed. And just to show one more scary graph, so these are the planetary boundaries concepts. You might be familiar with it if you're an ecologist or study Earth systems. So basically, if it's green, it's in the safe operating space. If it's red, we've already exceeded the planetary boundary. And you can see that more than, well, about half of them have already been exceeded, some by a lot. So chemicals and plastic are a big problem, I know, in Indonesia, in many countries. Species and genetic diversity have been lost a lot, especially in the tropics, but everywhere around the world. And then we have climate change that's already exceeded planetary boundaries, nitrogen, phosphorus, and land use. Some of them that haven't appeared to exceed the planetary boundaries yet are ocean acidification, the ozone layer, but it's the situation is not good. So that's kind of the alarming thing, is that technologies like the ones I've been talking about are being developed, and it's very promising, but the speed at which all of these degrading processes are taking place on Earth is very fast, and it's sort of like a race against time. So yeah, this is kind of the take-home message. Unless we can measure it, we can't manage it, and that's true for many things, but it's particularly true of carbon. And as these markets develop all around the world, especially in the tropics where most of the world's biomass is stored, for example, in Brazil, Indonesia, Africa, a lot of places with big tropical forests, this kind of technology is going to become more and more important because carbon markets are expanding everywhere. And it's a big industry, and it's also something that a lot of governments are interested in investing in, because it enables them to keep developing it economically without reducing the amount of emissions. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to Keith Cook, who's the CEO of Alpha, the team that's down in the photo, or some of them, Abby Yatsko, the PhD student we work with, Dr. Baptiste Regis, Dr. Rob Koeman, the University of Miami, the Kerry Institute of Ecosystem Studies, Macquarie University, Tipo Negoro, thank you so much for being such nice hosts. It's great to come here. And to SCU, we've also been doing some presentations over there. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. J. Calvert. It's very interesting explanation about LiDAR technology and its application. So now times for question and answer session. Yeah. First, I would like to invite 3 questions. Yeah. If possible, one question from this side and the central, and from this. Okay. Raise your hands. Okay. You may ask in Bahasa Indonesia also. Yeah, so we'll translate for you. Yeah. But I believe you can ask in English also. Okay. Yeah. No one from student? Or okay. So maybe Pak Bas, do you have question? Yeah.
Thank you for time. I have some question for Calvert. I'm interested in KRS, especially for this benefit using to measurement in ecological OS. Maybe my question is very simple. First, you saw that in the technical use, we use ELS we must conduct it in low wind condition. Are there the windy condition is disturbing about measurement? If yes, if any algorithm how to compensate about windy situation, because maybe every another ecosystem have different windy situation. Maybe some ecosystem always almost have high windy, or maybe that procedure we must select exact time when there are no windy. For example, at the night, or at some seasons, or at something like that. That's the first question. And the second one, all of your presentation give example about woody forest. Can this TFS or LiDAR or whatever level can be used to measure about semi-woody or deciduous or not? And the third question about woody situation. Your example about woody already laying on the ground. Can this method can be distinguished the catwood still in the same position? Can we distinguish between live trees and cat trees or semi-cat trees with the TFS technology?
Okay, thanks so much for your questions. Well, it's a good point. So for the first one about the wind, it's very important to scan in low wind conditions between 0 and 5 kilometers per hour. And the reason is because when you scan in a windy condition and the tree is going like this, you basically get like a blur, like in a photograph. And when it blurs like this and you go to model the tree, it basically models bigger. The tree looks bigger. So if you're trying to measure biomass, you don't want movement because it will have an artificially inflated higher measurement of biomass. So you're right, for that reason, sometimes the teams go and scan in the nighttime, like 9 p.m., 10 p.m., or very early in the morning, like 4 a.m., when the wind levels are low. And yeah, it's true, like in some ecosystems, there's always going to be wind. So it's for those ecosystems, you have to be very careful about how you plan your field work. So there's some good, Windy is an app online where you can look at all of the predictions of wind movements. They have some kind of model where it shows where the wind is going to be and how fast it's going to be, for example, tomorrow or in 1 week. And you can use that to plan your field work. So yeah, basically if you scan in windy conditions, there's no real way to improve the data if you collect it in a windy situation. So the very best thing is to scan with no wind, and then you have the best kind of data to work with later on. So the second question was about what, sorry, just remind me. Oh yeah, herbaceous versus woody forest. So with the modeling from TLS can go down to about 1.5 or 2 centimeters, like that big. If you have herbaceous ecosystems that are bigger than that in general, the stem of the plant, and you can get a good wood density, or not wood, but a density of the vegetation, then you could measure the carbon in that ecosystem. If you're interested in structure, then that's fine. If you're just interested in studying ecosystem structure for other reasons, for ecological questions, for example, then you could use TLS. In ecosystems where it's a lot of very thin sticks and branches, it's less appropriate because at the moment, at least with the resolution that we work with, which is we use some of the best machines, it's very difficult to get good measurements for very thin herbaceous vegetation. And then you were asking about dead wood. So you can detect standing dead trees, and usually that's based on whether they have leaves or not. So it's not as accurate in ecosystems where there's deciduous plants. So in the Northern Hemisphere, for example, or in tropical ecosystems that have seasonally deciduous plants. But usually, if a tree is dead, it loses its leaves. So there are ways to look at the point cloud, so the original data, and detect if the trees are on or off, and then you can flag that tree as alive or dead. And then you can quantify the amount of standing dead as well. But I think in general, the amount of wood that's on the ground dead is a lot higher than standing dead, like pretty soon they fall over. But that's something that the team is working on, trying to quantify as well. Does that help? Have answered your question? Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, please. Your name first and then your questions.
And my question for you is that I'm sorry in advance if you have explained more and try discussion, but is there any external internal factor that's going to affect
Is there any external or internal factors that would affect what? Sorry? Okay. So were you asking about sort of accuracy?
Like, I don't know, the size of the trees or like human error?
Okay, yep. So yeah, both of those things that you mentioned are factors. So the size of the trees, like we're talking about with the herbaceous small plants versus big trees. Bigger trees are much easier to capture and model. If it's raining, for example, that's not good because the LiDAR hits the raindrops and then gets little points in the air, so you get a very fuzzy kind of scan. So you have to do a lot of cleaning to get rid of the dirtiness that the rain introduces. We don't do a lot of scanning in the rain anyway because the machine's pretty expensive, so we don't want to put them out in the water. In terms of human error, I think probably the most annoying thing is if you have it on a tripod and you're scanning, if something falls, like a small stick or somebody's foot bumps the tripod, the whole scan is useless because even if there's a very slight tilt in the scanner, all of the data will be moved like this in sort of half of the scan or whenever it gets up. But actually in the machines, in the terrestrial laser scanners, they have a sensor, so if there's a bump, then it'll immediately tell you that there's been a bump, and it'll just delete that scan, and you have to do it again. So in terms of human error, they're pretty easy to use. It's really just you set the settings, then you press go. But I think one of the most important things is to understand how dense the scanning positions need to be depending on the ecosystem. So in the video, they were kind of scanning in open woodland, in eucalyptus woodland. So there's not many trees, it's very open, and there's not much occlusion, which means blocking of the LiDAR by different structures. In a forest that's like native to Java, for example, a dense tropical rainforest, you would want to put the scans positions much closer to each other. So in the video, I think they looked like they were about 20 meters apart. So it was like 20, 20, 20, in a row of 6, and then coming back to have 36 positions. In a thick tropical rainforest, you would probably want to have something like 5 meters or 10 meters at the most. So things like that require planning, and all of it influences the outcome of the quality of the data. So yeah, it's a bit of a process, but I think probably the main thing that influences the quality of the results is just how well each scan has been planned. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question. That for the terrestrial laser scan. if there's a cloud like in the forest, yeah, that could be a problem. If there's clouds, yeah, it would be similar to rain. The LiDAR would be impacted by all of the moisture in the air, and then you would end up with a lot of haze. That's not helpful. You want to be modeling the forest. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, a question from student on the left side. Yeah. Okay. I have a question here. In terms of you mentioned about the burning and biomass, right, in savanna landscapes. Yeah. So how does LiDAR technology assist in monitoring the impact of controlled burning and biomass in savanna landscapes? So how is the mechanisms?
Yeah. So the aim of that particular project is to provide baseline measurement. So before any change in the burning regime is implemented, the idea would be to go and quantify the biomass across the landscape as a baseline measure. And so like say you had a property that was like 100,000 hectares, maybe 25,000 hectares, you could have no change in management. 25,000 hectares, you could be burning with a particular burning regime, and then the two others could be different approaches as well. And then over the years, you could measure again and again and again to see how the different fire regimes are impacting the amount of tree biomass across the landscape. So until now, the Australian government hasn't had any way to do that. What they use are some models which are kind of like continent-wide models over a very big area, and they basically rely very heavily on the allometric scaling models. And there's been no way to sort of measure in real time the change in biomass across the landscape. So for that reason, this kind of LiDAR approach will allow people to assess how different burning regimes will impact it. And it's really important because most of the north of Australia burns every year. In fact, almost all of it, especially in the savanna zone. So it's a big source of carbon emissions, and it's also a big sink of carbon emissions because it's all forested land. So hopefully over the next few years, we'll see the effect of using this kind of approach and we'll be able to assess different burning regimes.
Yeah, it's interesting because they have the same condition also for the burning, especially in plantation, palm plantation. Yeah, so very burning condition for plantation. Well, so I'm imagining compared to X-ray, and then also in health sector, yeah, for medicine, X-ray, and then also MRI, and also USG or ultrasonography. Right? So what are the basic difference LiDAR technology compared to the previous?
Well, the physics are different. So with the ones you mentioned, they're using sound waves or X-rays. With LiDAR, it's light, they're photons. Just a very focused form of light in the form of lasers. So it's non-destructive, like with X-rays, I think you have to be careful with living tissue because it can impact DNA and that sort of thing. The laser beams that come out from the LiDAR scanners are just light. They're not visible light, they're different wavelengths, but they're just light. So I guess that's the main thing. The purpose is also different. It's mapping the outside surfaces of structures in high detail. Whereas I guess these other technologies you talk about looking inside. But I think it's kind of all the same, part of the same story. And It's basically spatial mapping, helping people make better decisions.
So it's completely safe for human or for animals.
Yeah, it's safe. It's just it's as if you were shining a light on something for a very short amount of time.
Yeah, because I remember for the laser point. So that's the yeah, there's the this is the impact for laser point if you point it directly to our eyes, for example. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's the laser beams that come out from the scanners are very small, very small, and they only come out for a very split second, and then they're moving on. So they're not really focused like in that same way. It's like a whole bunch of like a spray of very tiny little lasers. So they don't injure anything that they hit, including people.
Yeah, so the even intensity, it's a very light,
Low intensity.
low intensity. Okay, last opportunity. Any question? Oh, okay, okay. Fine. Okay.
So I have two questions. My first question is I'm interested in how LiDAR works. You need to put multiple points of scanning to make an accurate 3D model, or do you need to only have one spot in an area to have, for example, a good 3D model for I was thinking about just having one point in a blind spot, so you and for the second question is, was there any idea of another form of measurement in field other than ALS? And you had back down to measure the weight. Is it necessary to use that method, or is there any other method to measure your weight?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Good question. So for the first one, if you imagine, so we want to scan this bottle, and we put the scanner here, it'll be missing all of this data. This is empty. This would be like, you would have like a shell that would be like around here, and here there would be nothing. So you would need to take the scanner and put it here, and maybe over here as well. And that's why we scan in a grid pattern. So in the video you saw there were scans all over in the forest, so that's to get all of the different angles. So yeah, you can't get a good 3D model unless you get visibility from the scanner from at least two directions, and it's better to have 3 directions to get good coverage points. And so for the hollowing question, I think there is another technology. So I mentioned the one that's like a needle that goes into the tree. Like in the presentation, there were photos of the team holding that thing that looked like a gun, and it puts the needle into the tree and measures how much hollowing is there. That's one way of measuring hollowing without cutting the tree down. And by the way, we cut the trees down. They were going to be cut down anyway. It was to make a fire corridor to stop fires coming in. So they were not innocent trees. Well, they were innocent trees, but they were going to die anyway. So there's the needle technology that I showed. There's another form of measuring hollowing that I think is like, it's like ultrasound that you were mentioning. It puts a sound wave into the tree, and it kind of measures the way the sound is, and if there's an echo inside, then it will tell you if there's a hollow. Those two things are the only ones I'm aware of that allow you to see basically inside the tree and know if there's hollowing. But the good thing about the needle is that it's quick and it doesn't really injure the tree. It's a very small hole, and so you can go around and do a lot of sampling in a short space of time and get an idea of how much hollowing is in the ecosystem. So that's what we recommended people use. And if you can sort of quantify the hollowing that's in the ecosystem, generate the biomass estimates that you get from TLS, then you can just deduct what you detect to be the amount of hollowing in the system off your estimates, and then that would be your corrected estimate. So yeah, thanks.
Okay. I think we have all questions for today's. Thank you, Dr. Jade, for responding all questions. Yeah. So I'm going to summarize for our today's topics. So first one, LIDAR helps in addressing the climate and biodiversity crisis by providing accurate measurements of forest carbon storage and ecosystem conditions. And LiDAR technology also in forest biomass and structure. So it compares the terrestrial laser scanning or TLS to traditional allometric models, highlighting TLS superior accuracy, particularly in quantifying carbon stored in forest biomass. Then challenges in biomass estimation, internal tree damage from termites and fungi, common in savanna ecosystem, can lead to biomass overestimations. Testing ecosystem for tree hollowing is essential when using TLS to ensure data accuracy. LiDAR also support large-scale ecological research, such as monitoring biomass in savannas affected by controlled burning and analyzing rainforest light environments across canopy heights. And the last point, for the ecological implication, improve accuracy in biomass and decay measurement can enhance carbon models, helping predict future climate impact and better manage carbon offset initiatives. Okay, I want to express my deep gratitude to Dr. J. Calvert for sharing his valuable knowledge and insight with us today. Your work truly serves as an inspiration to all of us in this field and beyond. I would like also to thank our participants for your engaging questions and thoughtful participation. Okay, thank you once again to everyone for making this event a success. Well, before, I think big applause for our speaker today. So before we bring this event to a close, we have a special token of appreciation. So I will give it to MC today, Putri. Pak Anto mewakili
Okay, thank you for all that is also participant. Right now we have to commemorate the photo session. May I request our in-person participant and also supply in the front of the hall, please. So please stand up. That would be good if you are going to be standing up. Okay, so in the countries, you may already GP present for photograph. So guys, please say leader, okay? Are you corrected? So in the country, right? 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. Leader. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So distinguished guys, as we conclude today's seminar lecture, I would like to express on behalf of the Department of Biology, Department to our program gratitude for our estimated speaker, Dr. Jen Calvert, for sharing his invaluable insight about exploring the cutting edge of application of LIDAR, technology and ecological research and conservation effort. And also our distinguished moderator, Dr. Nurul Hadian for his presentation, and Dr. Asa Widiarjo for the Department of Biology Leadership for the unwavering support, and our dedicated IT team for ensuring seamless spiritual connectivity, and also the most importantly, to all participants, both personal and online, for your engagement for the notification. For our online participants, the recording of this session will be made available through our department official channel access information shall be communicated via remote. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Gue jadi sapam. Palsu.